In the heart of Willow Creek, a serene suburban enclave in Virginia, the morning sun cast a golden glow over manicured lawns and white picket fences. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of blooming azaleas and freshly cut grass. It was the kind of morning that promised tranquility, a perfect backdrop for the peaceful retirement Michael Reynolds had envisioned when he settled here 5 years ago. At 58, Michael, a retired Navy SEAL, cherished these quiet moments. His days of high-stakes missions and covert operations were behind him, replaced by the simple pleasure of a steaming mug of coffee on his front porch. Michael's home, a modest two-story with a brick facade, sat at the end of Maple Lane, a street lined with towering oaks. He'd chosen Willow Creek for its calm, its sense of community, and the promise of a life free from the chaos he'd known in his military career. This morning, as he sipped his coffee, the world seemed to align with that promise. Children laughed in the distance, their voices mingling with the hum of a lawnmower. A neighbor waved as she jogged by, her ponytail bouncing. Michael nodded back, his weathered face breaking into a faint smile. But beneath the calm, a familiar unease stirred in his gut. It was an instinct honed over decades of facing danger, a sixth sense that had saved his life more times than he could count. He set his mug down, his eyes scanning the street. Nothing seemed out of place, yet the feeling persisted, like a distant drumbeat warning of an approaching storm. The knock came at 8:47 a.m., sharp and authoritative, shattering the morning's serenity. Michael rose, his movements deliberate, and crossed the hardwood floor to the front door. He paused, hand on the knob, and took a steadying breath. Years of training had taught him to trust his instincts, and right now, they were screaming. Opening the door, he was met by 3 men standing on his porch. They wore dark blazers, clipboards in hand, and lanyards with badges that gleamed under the morning sun. The badges read Willow Creek Homeowners Association, but something about them felt off. Their suits were too crisp, their postures too stiff, as if they were playing a role they hadn't fully rehearsed. "Good morning, sir," the leader said, his voice smooth but laced with an edge of condescension. He was tall, with slicked back hair and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I'm Richard Hayes, with the HOA. These are my colleagues, Tom and Greg. We're here to discuss an urgent matter." Michael's eyes narrowed slightly. "What kind of matter?" he asked, his tone even but guarded. Richard cleared his throat, glancing at his clipboard as if it held the script to his performance. "The HOA has implemented new safety regulations. It's come to our attention that you possess firearms, and we're here to ensure compliance by confiscating them." The words hit Michael like a punch to the gut. Shock rippled through him, but he kept his face impassive, a skill perfected in the face of far greater threats. "I don't recall any vote on that," he said, his voice low and steady. "Last I checked, the HOA doesn't have the authority to demand my property." Richard's smile tightened. "It's a recent decision, sir. For the safety of the community. We're just following protocol." Michael studied the man, his SEAL training kicking into overdrive. Richard's eyes darted away when challenged, a telltale sign of deceit. Tom shifted his weight, his fingers twitching nervously. Greg's badge hung slightly askew, the laminate catching the light in a way that suggested it was homemade. These weren't HOA officials. They were imposters, and they were on his doorstep with a purpose that reeked of malice. "I'll need to see some proof," Michael said, crossing his arms and planting himself firmly in the doorway. "Official documentation, IDs, something with a signature from the board." The men exchanged glances, their confidence faltering for a fraction of a second. Richard recovered first, producing a folded envelope from his pocket with a flourish. "Of course, sir. It's all here." Michael took the envelope, his fingers brushing against the cheap paper. He unfolded it slowly, his eyes never leaving the men. The document inside was a poorly crafted forgery, riddled with typos and vague language about community safety. It lacked the HOA's letterhead, the board's signatures, or any legal weight. It was a sham, and they knew it. "This doesn't prove anything," Michael said, handing it back. "My rights aren't your protocol. They're law." Richard's jaw tightened, and for the first time, a flicker of fear crossed his face. "Mr. Reynolds, non-compliance could result in fines or further action," he said, his voice rising slightly. Michael's gaze hardened, his voice dropping to a dangerous calm. I don't think you understand, Richard. This is my home. Your scare tactics won't work here. The air grew thick with tension, the kind that precedes a storm. Michael stood motionless, his presence a wall of resolve. He'd faced insurgents, navigated war zones, and stared down death. These men, with their fake badges and flimsy lies, were no match for him. But they didn't know that yet. As the standoff stretched on, Michael's mind raced. Who were these men? How many others had they targeted? The HOA had never been this bold, and the real board people like his neighbor Ellen, a no-nonsense retiree who ran the meetings with an iron fist, would never sanction something so brazen. This was bigger than a simple scam. It felt personal, calculated, and deeply wrong. He needed answers, but he also needed to play this smart. Rushing in could tip his hand, and he wasn't about to let these wolves in sheep's clothing think they had the upper hand. Instead, he leaned into his training, probing subtly for weaknesses. "Tell me about this ordinance," he said, feigning curiosity. "When was it passed? Who proposed it?" Richard stammered, his rehearsed answers unraveling. "It was last month. The board voted unanimously." "Unanimously?" Michael raised an eyebrow. "Funny, I didn't get a notice. Neither did anyone else on my street." Tom shifted uncomfortably, and Greg's eyes darted to the side, as if searching for an escape. Michael's questions were simple, but they cut through the men's facade like a knife. Each vague response, each hesitation, was a piece of the puzzle falling into place. These men weren't just liars, they were amateurs, and they were in over their heads. Michael's thoughts turned to Ellen. She'd been on the HOA board for a decade, a stickler for procedure and fiercely protective of the neighborhood. If anyone could confirm his suspicions, it was her. Discreetly, he slipped his hand into his pocket, his fingers finding his phone. With practiced ease, he navigated to her contact, shielding the screen with his body. The call connected, and Ellen's voice came through, sharp and no-nonsense. "Michael? What's up?" she asked. "Got some guys here claiming to be HOA," he said quietly, his tone casual but urgent. "Saying they're here to take my guns. You know anything about this?" Ellen's response was immediate. "Not. There's no such rule, and we haven't sent anyone. Call the police." The confirmation was all Michael needed. The men before him were frauds, and their time was running out. He ended the call, his eyes locking onto Richard's. "You claim to represent the HOA," he said, his voice carrying the weight of a man who'd seen through their charade. "But you're lying. And I'm not the kind of man you want to lie to." Richard's face paled, and for the first time, the men realized they'd underestimated their target. Michael Reynolds wasn't just a retiree. He was a warrior, and they'd walked into his domain. The morning sun climbed above Willow Creek, casting long shadows across Michael Reynolds' front porch. The air, once filled with the gentle hum of suburban life, now crackled with tension. Michael stood in his doorway, his broad frame filling the space, his eyes locked onto the three imposters who dared to challenge him. Richard, the self-proclaimed leader, tried to maintain his air of authority, but the cracks in his facade were widening. Tom and Greg, his accomplices, shifted uneasily, their confidence eroding under Michael's unrelenting gaze. "You're making a mistake, Mr. Reynolds," Richard said, his voice straining to sound commanding. "This is for the community's safety. We have the authority to—" "Authority," Michael interrupted, his tone sharp enough to cut through the morning air. "You've got no authority here. I just spoke to Ellen Carter, a Real HOA board member. She says you're not with them. No ordinance, no vote, no nothing. So why don't you tell me who you are?" The words landed like a grenade, and the men froze. Richard's mouth opened, then closed, his rehearsed script crumbling. Tom's eyes darted to the street, as if calculating the distance to their escape. Greg's hand twitched toward his clipboard, a nervous tick that betrayed his fear. Michael's revelation had stripped away their pretense, leaving them exposed in the harsh light of truth. For a moment, silence reigned. Michael's training as a Navy SEAL had taught him the power of a well-timed pause, the way it could unnerve an opponent and force them to reveal their hand. He studied the men, cataloging every detail, the slight sheen of sweat on Richard's brow, the way Tom's shoulders hunched, the fake badge on Greg's lanyard that was starting to peel at the edges. These weren't just con artists, they were sloppy, and that made them dangerous in a different way. Desperate men made reckless choices. Richard recovered first, forcing a smile that looked more like a grimace. "There must be a misunderstanding," he said, his voice tight. "We'll get this sorted out with the board. In the meantime, we need you to comply." "Comply?" Michael's voice was low, almost a growl. "You come to my home, lie to my face, and demand my property? You're not walking away with anything but a police escort." The threat hung in the air, and the men's bravado withered. Michael's presence was a force unto itself, a blend of quiet strength and unyielding resolve. He'd faced down enemies in deserts and jungles, men armed with far more than clipboards and lies. These imposters, with their flimsy charade, were no match for him. But Michael wasn't just fighting for himself. This was about principle, about the sanctity of his home and the rights he'd spent his life defending. As the standoff stretched on, Michael's mind worked at lightning speed. He needed to keep them talking, to buy time until the police arrived. He'd already texted Ellen to call 911, and he trusted her to act fast. But he also needed information. Who were these men? What was their endgame? The audacity of their scam suggested they'd done this before, and the thought of them preying on his neighbors, families, retirees, people who trusted the HOA, ignited a fire in his chest. "Let's try this again," Michael said, leaning casually against the doorframe, though his eyes never left the men. "Who sent you? Because I'm guessing it's not the HOA. You're not local, are you? Those accents Midwest, maybe? And that badge? Looks like it came off a printer in someone's basement." The jab hit its mark. Greg flinched, his hand instinctively touching the badge before he caught himself. Richard's smile vanished, replaced by a scowl. "You're out of line, Reynolds," he snapped. "We're here to do our job. You're the one causing trouble." "Trouble?" Michael chuckled, but there was no humor in it. "You picked the wrong house for your little con. I've dealt with worse than you in places you wouldn't last 5 minutes." The mention of his past was deliberate, a subtle warning that he wasn't just a retiree with a bad attitude. Michael's sealed background wasn't something he advertised, but in this moment, it was a weapon. He saw the doubt flicker in their eyes, the realization that they'd underestimated him. Richard tried to rally, stepping closer, his voice rising. "You think you're tough, old man," he said, a desperate edge to his tone. "You're alone here. No one's coming to help you." That was their mistake. Michael wasn't alone, and Willow Creek wasn't just a collection of houses. It was a community, and he'd seen its strength before during snowstorms when neighbors shoveled each other's driveways, during fundraisers for sick kids, during quiet moments of shared laughter. These men didn't understand that, but they were about to learn. As if on cue, a figure appeared at the edge of Michael's lawn. Ellen Carter, 62, strode forward with the determination of a woman who'd spent her career as a high school principal. Her silver hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and her eyes blazed with indignation. Behind her, other neighbors began to gather: Jim, the retired firefighter, Lisa, the single mom with 2 kids, and old Mr. Thompson, leaning on his cane but looking ready to fight. Word had spread, and Willow Creek was waking up. "Michael, you okay?" Ellen called, her voice cutting through the tension. She stopped a few feet away, her arms crossed, staring down the imposters like they were misbehaving students in her office. "I'm fine, Ellen," Michael said, his eyes still on Richard. "These gentlemen were just explaining why they're trying to steal my property." "Steal?" Richard sputtered, his face reddening. "We're here on official business." "Official, my foot," Ellen snapped. "I've been on the HOA board for 10 years. We don't send people to confiscate guns, and we sure as hell don't hire clowns like you. I've already called the police, so you might want to start explaining." The crowd grew, neighbors stepping onto the lawn, their murmurs rising into a chorus of anger and disbelief. Michael felt a surge of pride. These were his people, bound not just by proximity, but by a shared sense of justice. The imposters, sensing the shift, began to falter. Tom took a step back, his clipboard slipping from his hands. Greg's eyes darted to the street, where the first faint wail of sirens could be heard. Michael seized the moment, his voice rising to carry over the crowd. "My neighbors aren't just bystanders," he said, addressing the imposters but speaking to everyone. "They're the heart of this place. You thought you could come here, lie to us, scare us? You're not just Rangieri finished." The words galvanized the crowd. Jim stepped forward, his burly frame imposing. "You heard the man," he growled. "Get off his property." Lisa, holding her phone, was already recording, her voice steady as she narrated for the video. "These guys are frauds, trying to scam a veteran. Not in our neighborhood. The sirens grew louder, and the imposter's bravado collapsed. Richard's shoulders slumped, his fake authority dissolving like mist. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. The game was over, and they knew it. Michael's heart pounded, not with fear, but with the thrill of a battle well fought. This wasn't a war zone, but the stakes were just as real. His home, his rights, his community, they were worth defending, and he wasn't alone in that fight. The police cars rounded the corner, their lights flashing, and the crowd parted to let them through. Officers stepped out, their presence a stark contrast to the imposter's flimsy charade. As the police approached, Michael felt a calm settle over him. He'd done his part, but this victory belonged to Willow Creek as much as it did to him. The imposters were about to face the consequences of their deceit, and the neighborhood would emerge stronger for it. But questions lingered. How far did this scam reach? Were there others out there, preying on unsuspecting communities? Michael's instincts told him this wasn't the end, but for now, he stood firm, a guardian of his home and his people. The officers reached the porch, and Michael stepped forward, ready to tell his story. The imposters, cornered and exposed, had nowhere left to run. The battle was won, but the war for truth and justice was just beginning. The sirens' wail crescendoed as two police cruisers pulled up to Michael Reynolds' front lawn in Willow Creek, their red and blue lights slicing through the morning haze. The crowd of neighbors, now numbering over a dozen, stood resolute, their murmurs of indignation blending with the rustle of leaves in the autumn breeze. Michael remained in his doorway, his posture unyielding, his eyes fixed on the three imposters who had dared to invade his sanctuary. Richard, Tom, and Greg were visibly unraveling, their fake badges and clipboards now pitiful props in a failed performance. Officer Karen Mitchell, a seasoned cop with a no-nonsense demeanor, stepped out of the lead cruiser. Her partner, Officer Daniel Ruiz, followed, his hand resting casually near his holster. The crowd parted to let them through, their presence a beacon of legitimate authority that starkly contrasted the imposter's flimsy charade. Michael nodded to Karen, a familiar face from community events, and stepped forward to meet her. "Morning, Michael," Karen said, her voice calm but authoritative. "Ellen called us. What's going on here?" Michael gestured to the three men, who were now huddling closer together, their confidence shattered. "These gentlemen claim they're with the HOA, here to confiscate my firearms for safety regulations. The problem is, there's no such rule, and they're not with the HOA. Ellen confirmed it, and their documents are fake." Karen's eyes narrowed as she turned to the imposters. "Is that so? Let's see some ID and those documents." Richard, still clinging to the remnants of his bravado, stepped forward, his hands trembling slightly as he handed over the forged envelope. "It's all in there, officer. We're just doing our job." Karen took the envelope, her expression skeptical as she unfolded the paper. She scanned it briefly, then held it up, her voice dripping with disdain. This is your authority? Looks like something my kid could whip up in art class. Names now." The crowd pressed closer, their phones out, recording every moment. Lisa, the single mom, was live streaming, her voice steady as she narrated for her growing audience. "These guys tried to scam a veteran in our neighborhood. Police are here now, and they're not getting away with it." Tom, the youngest of the trio, cracked first. "It wasn't my idea," he blurted, his voice shaking. "We were just following orders." "Shut up, Tom," Richard hissed, but the damage was done. Greg's face paled, and he took a step back, as if the lawn might swallow him whole. Karen raised an eyebrow, her pen poised over her notepad. "Orders from who? Start talking, or you're all going downtown." Michael watched the scene unfold, his SEAL instincts cataloging every detail. Tom's outburst was a breakthrough, a sign the group was fracturing under pressure. He knew the psychology of interrogation fear, and guilt could unravel even the tightest conspiracies. But he also knew this wasn't just about these three. They were pawns, sent by someone with a bigger agenda. The question was, who? As Karen and Daniel began questioning the men, Ellen approached Michael, her face a mix of relief and fury. "I can't believe they had the gall to pull this," she said, her voice low. "I've already called the rest of the board. We're locking down all communications to make sure no one else gets targeted." "Good call," Michael said, his eyes still on the imposters. "But this isn't a one-off. They're too organized, even if they're sloppy. We need to find out how far this goes. Ellen nodded, her principal's instincts kicking in. I'll start digging through HOA records, see if anyone's been tampering with our notices or member lists. This feels like someone's been watching us. The crowd's energy shifted as the police began to take control. Jim, the retired firefighter, stood with his arms crossed, his burly frame a silent warning to the imposters. Old Mr. Thompson, leaning on his cane, muttered about crooks and disrespect, his voice carrying the weight of 80 years of life experience. The children, who had been playing in the street, now watched wide-eyed, sensing the gravity of the moment. Karen's questioning grew sharper. You're telling me you drove here from Ohio, got these fake badges, and thought you could just waltz into a man's home and take his property? Who's paying you? Richard, cornered, tried to deflect. We're contractors, okay? We were hired to enforce community standards. It's not personal. Contractors? Daniel scoffed, glancing at Michael. You picked the wrong guy to mess with. This man's a Navy SEAL. You're lucky he didn't dismantle you before we got here. The mention of Michael's background sent a ripple through the crowd. Neighbors who hadn't known his past exchanged glances, their respect deepening. Michael, ever humble, downplayed it with a slight shake of his head, but the truth was undeniable. His training had given him the edge to see through the scam, and his resolve had rallied the community. As the police continued their interrogation, Michael's mind raced. The imposter's mention of Ohio was a clue, but it raised more questions. Was this part of a larger network, targeting veterans or gun owners? The audacity of the scam suggested they'd hit other neighborhoods, exploiting trust in HOAs to intimidate residents. The thought made his blood boil, but he kept his emotions in check, focusing on the next move. Karen turned to Michael, her expression serious. We're taking them in for questioning. Fraud, impersonation, attempted theft, looking at serious charges. You want to press charges? Absolutely, Michael said without hesitation. And I want to know who's behind this. They didn't come up with this on their own. Daniel nodded, cuffing Richard's wrists as the man protested weakly. Tom and Greg, resigned, didn't resist as they were led to the cruisers. The crowd erupted in murmurs of approval, some clapping, others shaking their heads in disbelief. Lisa's livestream comments exploded with support, viewers from across the country praising Michael's stand and Willow Creek's unity. As the police loaded the imposters into the cars, Michael felt a weight lift, but not entirely. The victory was sweet, but incomplete. He needed answers, and he needed to ensure this couldn't happen again. Turning to Ellen, he said, we need a neighborhood meeting. Tonight. Everyone needs to know what happened and how to protect themselves. Already on it, Ellen replied, pulling out her phone. I'm sending a group text to the whole street. 7 o'clock at the community center. The crowd began to disperse, neighbors lingering to talk, their voices a mix of relief and resolve. Jim clapped Michael on the shoulder. You did good, man. We've got your back. Thanks, Jim, Michael said, managing a small smile. But this was all of us. They didn't stand a chance. As the police cars pulled away, Michael returned to his porch, picking up his now-cold coffee. The morning's peace had been shattered, but in its place was something strong. A community awakened, united, and ready to fight. He sat down, his mind already planning the next steps. The imposters were in custody, but their puppet masters were still out there. Michael wasn't done, not by a long shot. The afternoon sun climbed higher, casting a warm glow over Willow Creek. Neighbors returned to their routines, but the air was different, charged with a new sense of purpose. Michael's stand had sparked something, a reminder that even in a quiet suburb, vigilance was a necessity. As he sipped his coffee, he thought of the meeting tonight, of the faces he'd see, friends, allies, people who'd proven they were more than just neighbors. But beneath the satisfaction, a question gnawed at him. How many other communities had fallen for this scam? The imposters had targeted him because of his guns, but what about others who didn't have his training or support? The thought was sobering, and it fueled his determination. This wasn't just about Willow Creek anymore. It was about justice, about exposing a scheme that preyed on trust and fear. As he sat, Michael's phone buzzed with a text from Ellen. Meeting's set. The whole neighborhood's coming. Are you ready to lead this? He typed back, born ready. The stage was set, and Michael was prepared to take it to the next level. The imposters had underestimated him, but they'd also awakened a sleeping giant, the collective strength of Willow Creek. Tonight, they'd plan, strategize, and ensure no one else fell victim. For now, Michael allowed himself a moment to breathe, to savor the victory. But he knew the real fight was just beginning. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky over Willow Creek in hues of orange and purple. Michael Reynolds stood on his porch, the cool evening air settling around him as he prepared for the neighborhood meeting. The events of the morning, the confrontation with the fake HOA officers, the police intervention, the swelling support of his neighbors still pulsed in his veins. At 58, Michael had seen his share of battles, but this one was different. It wasn't fought with weapons or in distant lands. It was fought on his front lawn, with the heart of a community as his greatest ally. Inside his home, the living room was a reflection of his disciplined life, sparse, orderly, with a few framed photos from his SEAL days on the mantel. One showed him with his team in a desert, their faces gritty but smiling. Another captured a rare moment of downtime, laughing over beers in a far-off base. Those memories grounded him, reminding him of the bonds forged in adversity. Today, he'd seen echoes of that camaraderie in Willow Creek, and it stirred something deep within him, a renewed sense of purpose. Michael grabbed his jacket and headed to the community center, a short walk down Maple Lane. The streets were alive with the soft glow of porch lights and the chatter of neighbors heading the same way. Children rode bikes in the fading light, their laughter a reminder of what was at stake. This wasn't just about Michael's rights or his guns. It was about protecting the innocence and trust of a place where families thrived. The community center, a single-story building with large windows and a flagpole out front, was already buzzing when Michael arrived. Ellen Carter stood at the entrance, greeting neighbors with her characteristic blend of warmth and authority. She spotted Michael and waved him over, her silver hair catching the light. "You ready for this?" she asked, her eyes gleaming with determination. "Ready as I'll ever be," Michael replied, scanning the room. Over 50 people filled the folding chairs, their faces a mix of concern, curiosity, and resolve. Jim, the retired firefighter, sat near the front, his arms crossed. Lisa, the single mom, was there with her teenage son, both nodding as they whispered. Old Mr. Thompson occupied a corner, his cane propped against his chair, his sharp eyes missing nothing. This was Willow Creek, united in a way Michael hadn't seen before. Ellen called the meeting to order, her voice cutting through the murmurs. "Folks, we've had a hell of a day. Most of you know what happened at Michael's place this morning, but we're here to make sure everyone's on the same page and to decide what we do next." She recounted the incident, the imposters posing as HOA officers, their attempt to seize Michael's firearms, his quick thinking, and the community's response. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the room as she described the fake badges and forged documents. When she mentioned Michael's call to her and the police's swift arrival, applause broke out, directed at Michael. He raised a hand, deflecting the praise, but the crowd's gratitude warmed him. "Michael's a hero," Ellen said, her voice firm. "But this isn't just about him. Those men didn't pick his house by accident. They targeted us, our trust, our sense of safety. We need to know why, and we need to make sure it never happens again." Michael took the floor, his presence commanding silence. At 6 feet 2 inches, with a lean frame and weathered features, he exuded a quiet strength that drew every eye. "I appreciate the support today," he began, his voice steady. "But Ellen's right, this isn't about me. Those men were part of something bigger. They mentioned being contractors from Ohio, hired to enforce standards. That's not a one-off scam. It's organized, and it's likely to hit other neighborhoods." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "I spent 20 years as a Navy SEAL, facing threats most people can't imagine. But the worst threats aren't always the ones with guns. They're the ones that erode trust, that make you doubt your neighbors or your rights. That's what these guys were banking on. They thought we'd fold. They were wrong." The room erupted in agreement, voices overlapping with stories of suspicious encounters, strange calls, odd emails, even a neighbor who'd been pressured to update their HOA dues with a shady third party. Michael listened, his mind piecing together a pattern. This wasn't just about guns. It was about control, about exploiting the systems communities relied on. Jim stood, his deep voice booming. "I've been in fires, seen people lose everything. But this is someone trying to burn down our trust. We need a plan, better communication, a neighborhood watch, something." Lisa raised her hand, her phone still in her hand from her live stream. I posted about this online, and people from other states are saying they've seen similar scams. Fake HOA reps, fake city officials, all pushing people to give up property or pay fines. We need to warn others. The ideas flowed, each neighbor building on the last. Ellen proposed a secure email system for HOA updates, verified by board members. Mr. Thompson suggested regular community drills, like the civil defense meetings of his youth. Michael offered to lead workshops on spotting scams, drawing on his SEAL training to teach observation and critical thinking. As the meeting progressed, Michael felt a shift. This wasn't just a reaction to a crisis, it was a transformation. Willow Creek was becoming a fortress, not of walls, but of vigilance and unity. He shared his plan to work with the police, who were digging into the imposters' backgrounds. They're in custody now, he said, but we need to know who hired them. I'll be meeting with Officer Mitchell tomorrow to see what they've uncovered. The meeting stretched past 9, but no one left. The energy was electric, a community galvanized by a shared purpose. When Ellen finally adjourned, neighbors lingered, exchanging numbers and forming committees. Michael stayed to answer questions, his calm demeanor reassuring even the most anxious. A young couple, new to the neighborhood, thanked him for standing up. We felt so helpless hearing about it, the wife said. Now we feel like we can do something. As Michael walked home, the stars bright overhead, he reflected on the day. His SEAL training had prepared him for the confrontation, but it was the community's response that turned a personal stand into a collective triumph. He thought of his old team, the way they'd relied on each other in the darkest moments. Willow Creek wasn't so different. They'd faced a threat together, and they'd come out stronger. Back home, Michael sat at his kitchen table, a notepad in front of him. He jotted down names, connections, and questions. Who was behind the Ohio contractors? Were they targeting veterans specifically? What was the endgame money, intimidation, or something else? His instincts told him the answers were close, and he was determined to find them. The next morning, Michael met Officer Karen Mitchell at the police station, a squat brick building on the edge of town. Karen greeted him with a firm handshake, her eyes sharp with purpose. "You stirred up a hornet's nest, Michael," she said, leading him to her desk. "Those guys are talking, and it's bigger than we thought." She laid out what they'd learned. Richard, Tom, and Greg were small-time crooks, hired through a shell company in Cleveland. Their job was to pose as HOA officials, targeting homeowners with registered firearms, using intimidation to seize weapons or extort payments. The operation had hit at least 3 other states, preying on suburban communities with active HOAs. The police were tracing the money, but the trail led to a maze of offshore accounts. "They're not the masterminds," Karen said, tapping a file. "Someone's pulling the strings, someone with resources. We're working with the FBI now, but we need your help. You saw through them faster than anyone. If you spot anything else, you call me." Michael nodded, his mind already racing. This was no longer just a neighborhood issue, it was a national one. He left the station with a renewed sense of mission, determined to protect not just Willow Creek, but every community at risk. Back in Willow Creek, the neighborhood buzzed with activity. Ellen's email system was up and running, and Jim was organizing the first neighborhood watch patrol. Lisa's live stream had gone viral, drawing attention from local news and even a national outlet. Michael's story was spreading, inspiring others to check their own HOAs and question suspicious demands. As the days passed, Michael became a quiet leader. He walked the streets, taught neighbors to spot red flags, and shared stories of his SEAL days to build trust. The community center became a hub, not just for meetings, but also for barbecues, game nights, and workshops. Willow Creek was no longer just a place to live. It was a family forged in the fire of adversity. But Michael knew the fight wasn't over. The puppet masters were still out there, and he was ready to face them. For now, he savored the unity of his neighbors, the strength they'd found together. It was a victory, but the war for justice continued. The days following the neighborhood meeting in Willow Creek were a blur of activity, a community transformed by the fire of a shared purpose. Michael Reynolds, at 58, found himself at the heart of it, not as a solitary warrior, but as a catalyst for something greater. His stand against the fake HOA officers had ignited a spark, and now Willow Creek burned brightly with vigilance, trust, and an unyielding commitment to protect one another. The morning confrontation, once a moment of chaos, had become a cornerstone of their identititious story of resilience that would be told for years to come. Michael's modest home on Maple Lane remained his sanctuary, but it was no longer just his. Neighbors stopped by with coffee, casseroles, or simply to talk, their gratitude palpable. Ellen Carter, the HOA board stalwart, had taken to calling Michael the General, a nickname he brushed off with a chuckle but secretly appreciated. Jim, the retired firefighter, had recruited a dozen volunteers for the neighborhood watch, their nightly patrols a visible reminder of their resolve. Lisa's viral live stream had turned Willow Creek into a symbol of resistance, with messages pouring in from across the country, people inspired to question authority and protect their rights. Yet, beneath the surface calm, Michael's mind was restless. The police had the imposters Richard, Tom, and Greg in custody, but the real threat remained at large. Officer Karen Mitchell's words echoed in his head. Someone's pulling the strings, someone with resources. The scam was too widespread, too calculated, to be the work of three small-time crooks from Ohio. As a Navy SEAL, Michael had learned to trust his instincts, and they told him this wasn't over. The puppet masters were out there, and he was determined to expose them. Each morning, Michael walked the streets of Willow Creek, his sharp eyes scanning for anything out of place. The routine grounded him, a blend of vigilance and connection. Neighbors waved, children called his name, and even old Mr. Thompson, usually gruff, offered a nod of respect. The community center hummed with activity workshops on scam prevention, self-defense classes led by Jim, and planning sessions for a new alert system. Michael taught a class on observation skills, drawing on his SEAL training to show neighbors how to spot lies in body language or forged documents. The turnout was standing room only, a testament to the neighborhood's hunger for empowerment. One evening, as Michael sat on his porch with a glass of iced tea, Ellen stopped by, her tablet in hand. "You've got to see this," she said, pulling up a news article. A town in Pennsylvania had reported a similar scam, fake HOA reps demanding firearms, using the same playbook. The article mentioned Willow Creek, crediting Michael's stand with raising awareness. "You're a national hero now," Ellen teased. Michael shook his head, sipping his tea. "I'm just a guy who didn't back down. The real heroes are all of you, showing up every day." Ellen's smile faded, her voice serious. "We're stronger because of you, Michael. But we need to keep pushing. I've been digging through HOA records, cross-checking with other neighborhoods. There's a pattern. Simone's been hacking into community databases, pulling lists of homeowners with gun permits." The revelation hit Michael like a jolt. "That's how they knew about me," he said, leaning forward. "They're targeting specific people, not just random houses." "Exactly," Ellen said. "I've sent everything to Karen. She's looping in the FBI. They're close to cracking this, but they need more." Michael's resolve hardened. This wasn't just about Willow Creek anymore. It was about stopping a network that preyed on trust across the country. He spent the next morning at the police station, meeting with Karen and an FBI agent named Laura Chena, no-nonsense woman with a sharp mind and a knack for cutting through bureaucratic red tape. They shared what they'd uncovered. The Ohio contractors were hired by a shadowy group operating through encrypted servers, funneling money through offshore accounts. The scam wasn't about stealing guns, it was about intimidation, sowing fear in communities to extort payments or silence dissent. Michael's case had blown the lid off, forcing the group to scramble. "You've given us a fighting chance," Laura said, her eyes meeting Michael's. "But these guys are slippery. We're close to tracing the money, but we need to catch them in the act. Think you can help us set a trap?" Michael didn't hesitate. Name the time and place. The plan was simple but bold. Stage a fake HOA meeting in a nearby town, leak it to the dark web as a prime target, and wait for the scammers to bite. Michael would pose as a homeowner, drawing them out while the FBI monitored communications. It was risky, but Michael thrived on calculated risks. He trained with the team, his SEAL skills sharpening their strategy, and when the day came, Willow Creek rallied behind him, spreading the word to ensure the bait was irresistible. The sting went off without a hitch. At a community center in a neighboring county, Michael sat among planted residents, his calm demeanor masking a predator's focus. When the fake HOA reps arrived, new faces, same playbook played along, probing their story until they slipped, revealing ties to a front company in Delaware. The FBI swooped in, arresting the operatives and seizing laptops that cracked the network wide open. The mastermind, a reclusive financier with a grudge against gun owners, was traced to a mansion in the Caribbean, extradited, and charged with racketeering. Back in Willow Creek, the news spread like wildfire. The community center hosted a celebration, not just for the bust, but for what they'd built together. Michael stood at the front, his voice steady as he thanked his neighbors. "We didn't just stop a scam," he said. "We showed the world what happens when a community stands united. You're my team, and I'd go into any fight with you." The crowd roared, their applause echoing into the night. Ellen announced new HOA protocols, encrypted communications, regular audits, and a permanent neighborhood watch. Lisa's livestream had sparked a national movement, with communities adopting Willow Creek's model. Michael, ever humble, deflected praise, but his heart swelled with pride. He'd fought for his country as a SEAL, but this victory, won on home soil, felt just as profound. Months later, Willow Creek was unrecognizable not in appearance, but in spirit. Neighbors greeted each other with warmth, their bonds forged in adversity. Michael, once a lone guardian, was now a community pillar, leading workshops, joining patrols, and hosting barbecues on his lawn. His porch, once a place of solitude, was now a gathering spot, alive with laughter and stories. One evening, as the sun set over Maple Lane, Michael sat with Ellen, Jim, and Lisa, watching kids play in the street. "You ever think it'd turn out like this?" Lisa asked, her phone finally off, her smile bright. Michael shook his head, a rare grin breaking through. "I just wanted to drink my coffee in peace. But I'll take this any day." The scam was gone, its architects behind bars, and Willow Creek stood stronger than ever. Michael knew threats would always lurk: greed, deceit, injustice, but he also knew his community was ready. They'd faced the storm and emerged unbroken, a testament to the power of unity, vigilance, and the quiet strength of a man who refused to back down. As the stars emerged, Michael raised his glass in a silent toast, not to himself, but to Willow Creek, a place that proved justice wasn't just a word, but a way of life. Thank you for joining Michael and Willow Creek on this journey of courage and community. This story isn't just about one man's stand, it's about the power we all have when we come together against injustice. But it also raises tough questions. How far should we go to protect our rights? Is violence ever justified in the face of deceit? Where do we draw the line between vigilance and paranoia? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Share your stance on these issues. Tell us how you'd handle a situation like Michael's, or recount your own stories of standing up to injustice. Your voice matters, and together, we can keep the conversation alive. Let's make this a space for real, raw, and respectful debate, because that's how communities grow stronger. Hit that like button if this story moved you. Subscribe for more tales of resilience, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Let's keep Willow Creek's spirit alive.